Morning, morning.
Morning.
Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Demai, Perek Shishi, Halacha Aleph. We're going to be learning today Daf Nun Gimel. We left off on Daf Nun Gimel Amud Aleph, 2 lines from the top of the Amud. The Gemara is referring back to the Mishnah, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Emasai Bezman Shanasanoi, even though the Gemara quotes Rabbi Yehuda, let us now, and guys, let's hold cup over here, quote the entire part of the Mishnah. And as we said already, that Rabbi Yehuda is not arguing with the Tanakama, he's clarifying the Tanakama. The Tanakama says that Hachoicher Sode Mi Yisrael, okay, guys, this is the Mishnah on Daf Nun Aleph, Toidem V'Noisamlo. And as we explained, that number one, just like we said by a makabel, same thing will be with a person who's a choicher, a person who's a tenant farmer, a person who made up with the owner to pay a fixed amount of produce from the field as his rights to the remaining, whatever that is, amount of produce, that this person is not obligated to take off any of the trumas or maasros. Theoretically, we don't consider his payment of chachira as paying with tevel, which is something that one may not do. We don't view it that way, and therefore, really, theoretically, he should not have to do anything. The reason why we say toidem v'noisam lo, as we learned the Mara Fulda in the Mishnah, and these are his words: the efshir begoidem shetiyaker, that when you remove things from the threshing floor, one is not allowed to do it. Ela imkei nitrama hatruma milena. So it's a din that you can't remove things from the goyim. Furthermore, you deduct the truma from that which you needed to pay. In other words, this tenant farmer will not go out of pocket because really he's not obligated to do anything. Toidem is a din that you can't remove things from the goyim. And on that din, that is where we're beginning today's daf. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Emosai, when do we say that we do not view his payment of whatever fixed amount they agreed upon as paying your debt with tevel, which would be prohibited? Only if you're giving, these are the words of Rabbi Yehuda, Bizman shenasan loi, mei oisa sada umei oisa hamin. Only if the quantity of produce that you're giving as payment, number one, grew in this field, and number two, it is the type that you guys agreed upon. In other words, a choicher, when he goes into a field, he tells the owner what he plans to plant. Potatoes, let's say. So only if he paid him potatoes that grew in that field. In other words, you need to have both conditions. It has to both be me'oisa hasada, and it has to be me'oisa hamin, which would imply quite clearly that if it's either one or the other, we no longer would say only toidem v'noisam loi, but then we would say ma'aser v'noisam loi. And ma'aser v'noisam loi doesn't only mean that aside of the truma, you have to take off the trumas and the maasros. It means more than that. It means that you cannot be menake, you cannot deduct that which you removed from your payment. That will be the key over here, because then we would view your payment as paying your debt. So that is what we have in our Mishnah. The Gemara right away will show us that there is a brayso that seems at least to dispute the ruling of the Mishnah, as we will see it inside. We will actually link our Mishnah to a topic that we have in Bava Metzia, a machlokes tanoim, whether a choicher is allowed to change the item that he agreed upon. We'll see how that will be very relevant to our sugya. That will be more or less Daf Nun Gimel Amud Aleph, and on Daf Nun Gimel Amud Beis, we're going to quote a machlokes, both b'shem Rabbi Yechanan. So we're going to have Chavraya b'shem Rabbi Yechanan versus Rabbi Law, which is really Rabbi Ila b'shem Rabbi Yechanan. Chavraya b'shem Rabbi Yechanan hold that Rabbi Yechanan holds that yesh kinyan la'akum. Rabbi Law b'shem Rabbi Yechanan will hold that Rabbi Yechanan holds ein kinyan la'akum. That's going back to the machlokes, right? Rabbi Meir versus Rabbi Huda and Rabbi Shimon. And we're going to bring in this topic for something that we just discussed on last year, which is the other part of the Mishnah, which is really the final part of the Mishnah, which is choicher migoi. There we said ma'aser v'noisam loi, and when we learned the Mishnah, we said, you know why? Because that's really a rabbinic penalty with the kavana of this discouraging goyim of owning land in Eretz Yisrael, because landowners ideally wanted to have tenant farmers and not sharecroppers. They wanted to know how much they're getting paid. People wanted to get a choichet. And by telling a yid that you have to be ma'ased v'noisin, so then whatever the agreed amount is, it's really going to cost the tenant farmer a lot more. Because ma'ased v'noisin, and only from the net, not from the gross, can he make his payment. So it's not a good deal for the choichet. So there's going to be less yidden wanting to function as the tenant farmer. All of that is done to discourage the goy of owning land in Eretz Yisrael. That is the way we learn the Mishnah. That will only be aligned with one of these two opinions, as we will see. And we will see that there can be a whole new way of understanding the Pshat in the Mishnah, and that will be connected to the Machlokes Yesh King or Ein King. And that may be, why is it that Ma'ased v'noisin, because of the rule that one may not pay their debt with Tevel. So that is going to be Daf Nun Gimel Amud Beis. So now again, Daf Nun Gimel Amud Aleph. We are beginning two lines from the top of the Gemara, right in the brackets. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Guys, again, remember that this is in reference to HaChoicher Sada Mi Yisrael, and don't forget that Toidem V'Noisem Loi is not really going to be out of pocket from the owner. It's simply a din. The Efshel L'Goyr and Shatiyaker El Imkein Nitrama Hatruma Mimenu. However, and that says Rabbi Yehuda, that's only if both conditions are met. Number one, that you're paying Ma'oisa Hasada and you're paying Ma'oisa Hamin. Rabbi Yehuda says the Gemara, the fact that you have to have both preconditions clearly indicates Ma'oisa Hamin. But even if you are giving the owner payment from the type that you agreed to plant in his field, but if it did not actually grow there, you don't have both preconditions, or in the other direction, or something that actually was grown there. You planted there, but it wasn't what you agreed upon. Here also, why? And why would that be the case? Now let me use these words, because it would appear that you're not giving the landowner his rightful share. It will appear that way, either because it didn't grow in his field, or because it wasn't that which you agreed upon. So now you created like a new debt. And since it has the appearance of the payment of the debt, and that will be the big rule, that one is not allowed to pay down one's debt with tevel, that is why it will have to be ma'ased v'noisen loy. Okay. Says the Gemara that it appears that there is a Braisa that argues with the Mishnah. Tani Rabbi Chia, this Braisa was taught by Rabbi Chia, that if you pay, again, this is the same case of HaChoicher Sada Mi Yisrael, if me Oisa HaSada, as long as you're paying product that grew in the land that belongs to the Balabas, Bein Me'oisa Min, whether it is the species that you agreed upon to plant, Bein Min Acher. In both of these cases, the Braisa, the Tani Rabbi Chia applies what we had in the Mishnah, Toidem V'Noisim Lo. And you don't have to separate anything other than Truma. And that's only a din in the Goyden. However, if you are paying with produce that grew Misada Acheres, Bein Ma'oisa Hamin, Bein Min Acher, again, it makes no difference. It's only about whether it grew here, whether it grew there. In both of these cases, Ma'ased V'Noisim Lo. In other words, according to the Braisa, the Balabas only cares about receiving produce that was grown in his field. And if that is happening, it's not the payment of the debt, it's the way we explain. When you own a land and you give it out in chachirus, and you were told that you're going to get 10 pounds, those 10 pounds are yours. It's that the choichet is leaving what's yours for you. You changed from 10 pounds to potatoes to 10 pounds of something else. He doesn't care. It's just about the 10 pounds, and it's about it growing in his field. So, Bekitzer, it appears again that the Tani Rabbi Chia argues with our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, let me explain to you what's under this machlokes. We're going to have two different ways of learning this Gemara. We're going to read over here the Pnei Moshe, and then if we'll have time, we'll go into the Marafula, which is going to be a very different approach. So says the Gemara, Masnisa Kerabon Shimon ben Gamliel, the logic behind the Mishnah versus the logic behind the Braisa will be dependent on the machlokes that we'll read in a moment in the Pnei Moshe between Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Omai Detani. Rabbi Chia will follow the shita of the Chachamim, and let's learn the Pnei Moshe. The Pnei Moshe is almost at the end of the narrow lines, right? It's the third to last narrow line in the Amid. Mas Nisan Rab Shimon ben Gamliel. Ma Detani Rabbi Chia must be Kechachamim upliga hachpluta. The Rashbag v'Chachamim. Where do we find this argument? The Pedic Test in Bava Mitzia, and we're going to have this in the Yerushalmi in Halacha Vav. Masnisa va'allah koi hachi. Both the Mishnah, right, and our topic is on this. The Tanin and Hassam, we learned in the Mishnah Hamakabel. I know we're speaking about Choichen, and we're going to Makabel. Doesn't matter. We're going to be focusing on how much right or how little right does any tenant have to change the agreed product. Oh, that's Mo'isamin Meminache. Hamakabel Sadam Echaver. And when he leased it, he told him Lizara Sa'odim, he's going to be planting barley. So the Mishnah writes over there, Lo Yizre En Lachitin. He's not allowed to change it to wheat. Why? Lefisha Hachitin Makchishim Esakarka Yoser Man HaSa'odim. Because wheat somehow takes out more nourishment than barley. It weakens the land. So he's not allowed to make that change. Now, even though the Mishnah says Hamakabel, so now when you look into the Sugya, Umakmin Allah Hasam, Hamakabel could be a generic word, but over there in that case, in Bava Mitzia Perek Tes Allah Chavav, the Bechachirus item, it's really speaking about you're a tenant farmer. Why? How did we get to that over there? Because the Ibe Kablanos, because if he's a Kablan, Amrinan, we would say that even though the land gets weaker, the owner would benefit so much by this deviation. He'll get so much more money, he wouldn't care. Let the land get weaker. Because the owner will be nehena b'shinoiseh, because it's better. Now that's only better if he gets a percent. It's interesting. And we'll see in a moment which one grows in greater quantity. So if he gets a percent, the added benefit of the percent that he will be getting is so great that our owner for sure wouldn't care for that deviation. But by a chachirus, he's getting the same number of pounds. So he's getting more or less the same quantity. In addition to that, his land is getting weaker. That's why the Mishnah says you're not allowed to change. That is in the direction of going from So'idim to Chitim. Guys, we're in the Pnei Moshe. Now, what happens Chitim to So'idim? Adarabba, since the land uses more nourishment for Chitim, so then the owner will zicher be maskim for So'idim. So holds the Chachamim. Clearly, you see by the Chachamim, guys, that you can make a deviation. Not always, but you can make a deviation. But Ashbag, who disallows it, this Sfira he has a general principle. It's not about the land getting devaluated, getting its nourishment depleted. It's not about the owner buying a makabel getting more produce. It's not about that. It's about you make an agreement, you got to keep your agreement. The Sfira the lo'olam ein lahachoicher l'shanu is not to show balabais. It's not about you don't make cheshboinus. Can't change. Now, guys, we're in the first widest line in the Pnei Moshe. The Masnisan, our Mishnah, the Shma'inon, that it makes that implies that l'divrei hakoil afilu noisen loy ma'oisa hasadi, even if you're giving the owner whatever quantity from that field, but it's not ma'oisamin, which means you deviated. Yeah, that's because our Mishnah follows the rule of Rashbag. Kirashbag the Hasamu, the Aida, the Asya, the Sfira Lay, the Lo Oilam, Kapid, Palabayas, Al Oisa Hamin, Shezek Kibel Olav Lazar. He doesn't want you to change their agreement. And Ve'im Noisan Lay Ma'oisa Asada, Ume Yoisa Min Shekibel Olav, if you would have done what you agreed upon, Haymisratza Bal Asada, Shiitan Loizeb Bilti Me'usar. Right? As we learned when we learned the Mishnah. That's the understanding. Again, Toinim is a unique din. You can't take it off the threshing floor. For Hushi, Yamafresh, Amaisa, Dadat, Dochirid. Abel Noisan Min Acher, Mimashkibel Olazara Basada, Sarah Hushi, Aser, Vinoisan Loy, Da Adate, the Hachal, Balasada. In other words, since he broke the agreement, when I break the agreement, then we will view my payment as I'm paying a debt. Wasn't the that agreement was broken. How did I break the agreement? By simply, I told you, the owner, I'm planting wheat and I planted barley. Barley, wheat. Even if there's no loss to the owner, you can't change. So the moment you break an agreement, the agreement of chachirus is not called paying a debt. If I broke the agreement, whatever I'll do going forward is paying a debt. In other words, post facto, the owner will say, okay, give me whatever. But it's like a new chiyuv. Makes a lot of sense. So that's based on Ashbak. And let's keep on reading, guys. We're in the Pnei Moshe, around 9 lines from the bottom. The Tani Rabchia, the Braisa of Rabchia said that Hachoicher Sada Mi Yisrael, the Toirem is it if it's Ma'oisa Hasada. I don't care what you did. It goes according to the Chachamim. Pligi. Ad Rabbi Yehuda, Esvira Lahu, the Hakoil Hoilach Achar Oisa Hasada. Right? Not like the Rashbag. Now, when we say the lekek pseida, he wants to make it clear that Pnei Moshe, it doesn't mean that there's never a kpeda. Who actually going from one direction, going from so'idim to chitim, there'll be a kpeda. Okay, but that's a detail. But in principle, if you're not doing something that's bad, the fact that you change the agreed item, in principle, that in itself doesn't break the agreement. The islahu shalapa'amim misratza balabayis kishezeh zoyra min achen. And for example, let's go to the case we just quoted on Bava Metzia. Which direction could you change? According to the Chachamim, when you agreed upon to plant wheat and you ended up planting barley, it's even better because it takes less nourishment from the ground. So that would work. That would work. Problem is, if that is the understanding, look inside back in the Gemara. In other words, we don't want to learn that Rabchia argues with Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Rabbeinu HaKadosh in our Mishnah, it's a Stam Mishnah. In other words, if Rabbi is paskening, like Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel was speaking about Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel and Bava Metzia, why would Rabchia argue? You know, there's another expression. It's not related, but I'm making a shtickle connection. Rebbe Loshana Chia Minayin. That's a classic expression in Talmud Bavli. Rebbe Loshana means if Rebbe did not include it in his Seder of Mishnayos, Rabbi Chia, who was the master student of Rebbe, where would he even get it from? And Hasidim quote this as Rebbe Loshana, if you don't go to the Rebbe at least once a year, how can you live? Rebbe Loshana Chia Minayin. That's a Chassidish attach. But in other words, that Rabbi Chia and Rebbe, they are aligned. Here, it's different. I know it's not the same, but it's the same. In other words, the Gemara is rejecting you understanding that Rebbe and Abchia are both paskening like a different Tana in this machlekes and Bava Metzia. We prefer not to go.
Why would Rebbe pasken like a
I don't know. That's a general question. Generally, we don't pasken like a Yachid, but it's not the only time. There are times that we pasken like a Dasya.
Also, it's interesting. He is spelled Chetz Yud Aleph. Here it's a
very good. So, and also Rab Ze'eda, that will be the biggest difference. No, in Yerushalmi, Rab Chia is always spelled with a hey, and in Rab Ze'eda, in the Babli is Zayin Yud Reish Aleph, Zeda, and here it's with an ayin, but it's the same. It's the same amoy. Okay, says the Gemara. Therefore, I'll tell you that asinon, that I'm going to make a reconciliation, and I know, Chavra, there's a big difference between the Pnei Moshe and the Marav Fulda. And it's really, it has to do with the Girsa'os. Actually, what we're going to do now is the Girsa that we will read right now will not be the way the Pnei Moshe understands it, because he has the opposite version. So we're going to read the Gemara inside. We're going to read the Marav Fulda. We have enough time. And then we're going to read it in the Pnei Moshe, and he has the Girsa in the Gemara flipped, so he's going to learn the opposite shot. Either way, it's a little daf. We have time to do both. So let's read it inside. Guys, this is following the understanding of the Maraful. Says the Mas Nisan is speaking about the Mokim Ploini. We're speaking about a specific place. What place? That Nohagu Lasri Soidim Keflaim Bechitim, where barley, we already learned in the Pnei Moshe that barley took less nourishment from the ground. Now, before you get into the makrish or not makrish, quantity. If I'm going to use the same shatach, the same square foot area, square acre area for chitim versus sa'odim, certain places when you planted sa'odim, it grew double in quantity. Nahagu lasei sa'odim keflayim lechitim. Now, for the record, barley was half as expensive. So it's not like, if you think about it, why would anyone plant wheat? You get a lot more volume. It's the same value, but there's double the amount. Now, what does the double amount do? It appears like you broke your agreement. Because I agreed to plant wheat, and from wheat, I would have to give 10 pounds. Now that I planted barley, since it grew double, I'm going to have to give 20 pounds. Think about it, it's gavaldic. The fact that I'm giving 20 pounds, what does that appear? It doesn't appear like I'm following the agreement that I made. If I followed the agreement, we don't view it as me paying a debt. We view me leaving for the owner what was always his, and that's why it doesn't matter if it's tevel. The moment I'm giving more than I agreed, even though of course I have to give more than I agreed because I agreed to plant wheat. I planted barley. His field gave double. So of course he's entitled to double and he's going to get double. But the fact that I agreed to give him 10 pounds, I'm giving him marshal, I'm giving him 20 pounds, it looks like I'm paying a debt. I didn't agree to give him 10. The moment there is the appearance of me paying a debt, I cannot do it prior to being ma'aseh because you can't pay a debt with them. Uma, the Tani Rabbi was b'moken shenahagu lasoi sa'odim kechitim will be the version. So even though you made a deviation, everyone, Mendel is following Chachamim. Here it's better, Das Rabbi, that if it's not being makrish the karka, it's okay. So even our Mishnah would agree to the case of to those locations, which is Rabbi referring to, that as long as you are paying me'oisa hasada, it doesn't even give the appearance that you're paying a debt.
Doesn't that cost the landowner money then? Because barley's cheaper.
But you get double. So it comes out to be the same.
This just says you give the same amount.
No. Here you give the same amount. So in that case, barley will be the same expense. Goes together. What makes a product more or less expensive is how much of it is available. In the places where barley would grow the same amount, it would cost the same amount, you would give the same 10 pounds. And everyone follows Chachamim that as long as you're not being makrish the karka, listen, if you're making a deviation that's detrimental to the land, no one agrees you can do that. But in principle, if it doesn't do something negative, just because you agreed to do one thing, you have the right to change things up. You're giving the same quantity. It follows the din of Chachim. That's the way the Marav will do. We have time, and I probably want to read the Pnei Moshe.
In the scenario where the land produces double the sa'arim,
yeah,
is it makrish shakaka more?
I don't think so. Never makrish shakaka more. If not, you would never be allowed to do it. Okay. Now the Pnei Moshe, 6 lines from the bottom before we turn to Amid Beis, guys, is Anan. It has a whole different girsa. The same idea. We will reconcile Misni, Ikadotani lay, Deloihi, Deloi Pligi. Hello, guys, the Pnei Moshe, Masnis and Maida, Bamakim Ploini, Vahoyo Yodu Alohem, Shabaoisa Makim, Loi Nahagu Lasis Sasorim Keflaim Bechitim. There was actually a place where barley did not grow double, which was the norm. The Hilkach Ikak Peida, Ba'oisa Hamin, Lefisha Balasada, Emeloi, Lohoy Lochan Shanis Famina Shekebal Tolach. I said Chitim. Why are you changing it to Sa'odim? In a place where it doesn't grow double, even though, by the way, Sa'odim does not weaken the ground, the Balabas told them, I already agreed to Chitim. In other words, the Pnei Moshe is going to learn that there are times that the Balabas will be makbid. When will the Balabas be makbid? If we agreed upon one thing, unless your change brings a lot more, forget about the number of value. Unless it grows, why are you changing? We made up Chitim, planted Chitim. And the tenant farmer is saying, nah, but I knew So'odim doesn't weaken the ground. I says, I already agreed to Chitim. It's my land. It's none of your business. That's what we agreed upon. The Hilkach Ikak paid, that's about he's upset. I'm sorry, I'm reading the same line twice. I wanted wheat. In other words, whenever we we make as a evaluation, a psychological evaluation, that the owner would be makbid, then you broke the agreement. Whenever we view it as you broke the agreement, whatever you pay, you have to be ma'ased prior. Uma the Tani Rabchia, Maida the opposite. He has the opposite version. Rabchia is the one that when you plant, the soidim grows double. The mekiv and shakar ke'edam akcheshes umishubachasi v'yisem keflayim nimtzes elo yihifsid. Here the owner is not makbid. Whenever the owner is not makbid, ba'afilu hu noisim le'soidim shazara kiven the noisim le'keflayim kechitim ke'ilu noisim le'chitim. It's amazing. Here even though you're giving him double. You're giving him double. The Bnei Moshe says just because the owner is getting double, it doesn't look like you're paying a debt. It's only about was the balabas makbid or not. When the balabas is makbid that you broke the agreement, then whatever you pay, you're paying a debt. Whenever we view that what you're doing is a debt, you have to be ma'asir v'noisim. Whenever we view your change not to be against the will of the owner, that means you didn't break the original agreement. So then the rule will be that in principle, a choicher doesn't have to do anything. You're not paying a debt. You're leaving the owner what the owner Breida, it was always says. Alama Truma is different, like we said, because since the choicher would take it off the threshing floor, there's a rule. You can never take anything off the threshing floor prior to being toilet, and you're menake. You deduct it. You don't lose any money. Okay, Gaval. So that was a beautiful reconciliation. Now let's go to Daf Nun Gimel Amud Beis. Now we're going to go to the last part of the Mishnah, to Halacha Aleph. Guys, God willing, tomorrow we're already beginning Halacha Beis. And that is, and I know that we learned in the Mishnah that the reason why you have to be Ma'asad, we learned in the Mishnah because the Chachamim wanted to disincentivize Goyim from owning land in Eretz Yisrael, and a choicher who will have to take off all of the trumas or maestros will never work there. And the owners rather choicher, so they're going to sell their fields, or lechatchila they won't buy their fields. That was the way we learned the Mishnah, and now we'll see. Really, this will be one of the two options. There'll be another whole way of learning the Mishnah, and it's going to be amazing how this will be contingent. This will be dependent on the machlekes Rab Meir. And who else? Rab Tarfon. Rab Tarfon versus Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Shimon. Whether a goy who owns land in Eretz Yisrael, does it remove the obligation of maestros from the produce itself? How was that related? Halkop, you'll see in a second. Let's begin reading inside. Says the Gemara, Hoch at Oimer, here, meaning by choicher from a Jew, not from a guy. We say, that's all you need to do. But if the same choicher is leasing it from a owner who's a non-Jew, then here the Mishnah says, why is that? So says the Gemara, there are two ways, two approaches. And they're both b'shem Rabbi Yechanan. And as we'll see, that the chevra b'shem Rabbi Yechanan, the Chavraya b'shem Rabbi Yechanan, let me just say by heart, a very important step, hold that Rabbi Yechanan paskins that yesh king and la'akum. Which is, by the way, it will fit everything we learned a few daf ago, that everyone paskin, not like Rab Meir. It's a chiddush, okay, but still we don't paskin like Rab Meir. Rab Meir is the one that holds that ein king and la'akum. His ownership doesn't remove anything. Rab Shimon holds, Rabbi Yehuda holds that his ownership takes the kedusha down a notch, and the produce that grew under his care biblically does not have to be tithed at all. Okay, so now that Chavraya b'shem Rabbi Yechanan konsu chachamim b'choicher min hagoyim, they made a knas v'lei konsu b'choicher min Yisrael. Why? The way we learned in the Mishnah. Why would they want Yakir for a guy not to own land in Eretz Yisrael? Because his ownership of the land takes the Kedusha down a notch. Produce that grew there, had a Jew owned it, part of it would have gone to the Kohen, part of it would have gone to the Levi. You are removing the Chiyuv of Trumas Umaisis. So they do not want for a guy to own land. So they made the terms of Chachira so bad that a Jew will never be choicher from a guy. Let's read inside the Marafulda, the second line from the top.
Over there by Nun Aleph, Marafulda said mitzad Yeshuv Haaretz.
Wait. I know. Okay, that's it. Konso Chachamim, the Sfirolei means that Chavraya had a tradition that Rabbi Yochanan holds that Yesh Kinyan L'Goy Ba'aretz Latkim and Amaisa, and therefore his ownership. Now, by the way, if that's the case, just to make it clear, if I'm choichet from a goy, if Yesh Kinyan, biblically, what do I mean ma'asid? There's no chiyuv at all. And a chanami. Min adin pata legamri. Elo konsu chachamim. What? Shetishoyer hakarka bura biyadoi. The reason, it's a knas. I have to take off all the trumas and all the maises, so no one will do chachira. So the guy won't find anyone to work on his land. And ultimately, the yim keren ali yisrael, him to sell it to a yid. Keep your finger in the Maraf folder. We're going to learn this Amud with the Maraf folder.
By the way, there's an alternative.
Yes.
Which is the guy landowner just won't hire Jewish workers. They'll just find non-Jewish chaychrim to
it wasn't practical at that time then. 100%. If that would be available, it wouldn't be a solution. For some reason, people think that the Jews are the landowners. Those Jews.
So back then, the Jews were the low-cost labor.
The Jews were the low-cost labor. We're speaking about from when the Romans, from the times of Hurdus, it went downwards. Correct. The Goyim went in there. We learned many Bishnaisen and Gittin. They would take land away by force. At the best case scenario, they would force the Jews to sell it to them against their will. And once they agreed, it's agreed. All these dinim. Yeah, it was Golus. That happened for the past 2,000 years. What do you think happened in Poland? What happened to all of the land that belonged to Jews? Who took them? The Polacks. That's it. Okay. Now we'll have a new thing that we didn't learn until now. Rabbi Law, which is Rabbi Law, we'll call him Rabbi Law, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, he holds that Rabbi Yochanan holds that ain't king in La'akum. And now there's a whole different way of understanding it. That Chafsa Midas Adin B'choichen min Hagoy. In other words, it's not that they gave him a knas. If yesh kinyan, the whole ma'asid is a knas. No, you're chayiv to be ma'asid. By a yid not. Why? Look inside the Maraf folder. 5 lines, the first narrow line from the top. The Sfirolei, that means Rabbi Law had a tradition that Rabbi Yochanan holds, Commando Amar, ain't king l'goy b'Eretz Yisrael. Umenadin chayv la'aseh. For the produce that grows in the land of a goy has to be tied. Another rule: goyim are not obligated to keep any mitzvahs. Ve'ena goy ma'aseh. V'havalei kipoireya choyboy b'ma'ois koyin b'levi. Think about it. If a Jew would have owned the land, what would have happened? All of this produce would have been tied. Now that a goy owns the land, the produce is chayiv to be tied, but the owner won't do it. So I'm going in a direction. If it's mine, the choichers, I'm chayiv to be. It's not mine, I know, but if it would have been mine, I'll be chayiv to be ma'aseh. So by me giving it to the goy won't be ma'aseh because he's not chayiv to keep the mitzvahs. That's the problem. It almost looks like I'm taking the 22% of the goy's part that really theoretically belongs to the Kohen and the Levi. And I'm using that as part of my payment. It's as if I'm taking from the Kohen and the Levi and paying him my debt. 1 second, what's the difference? The difference is that if the Jew is the owner, what's going to happen? When I leave the owner with his 10 pounds, he's chayiv to be ma'aseh. In other words, the Kohen and the Levi are not going to lose anything. Who cares? Who gives it? No, we're not looking at the Chaycher, we're not looking at the Jew, we're looking at the Kohen and the Levi. Because we already said, I'll repeat it again, that theoretically the agreement of a Chaycher is not that you have to be ma'aseh. Theoretically, the owner is maskim, I'm going to get my 10 pounds and you keep the rest. I'll deal with mine, you'll deal with yours. The chiyuv isuran is really al hamachachir on the owner. But if the owner is a goy, this only goes if you hold ein king in legoy. If you hold yesh king in legoy, who cares? The item doesn't have to be tied. But if ein king in lagoy, abel lagoy kiv and she'ein amuser, havale ki'ilu hisna imoy beloy meiser. The nimsu perei choyvoy. It looks like you're paying a debt from the coin and the Levi's belongings, because it's an item that has to be tied. It's a whole different understanding. So this is not to penalize. We're not trying to, for him to sell the land. It has to do with the rule that I'm not allowed to pay my debt with tevel, and I'm paying my debt with tevel, and this is tevel because just because the goy owns it, it doesn't take away the fact that it's called tevel. That was great. And now the Gemara says,
So then you should take a greater payment.
No. Let's go. The trumas umaisis has to be removed.
Right. So you take more, so you can remove it, and then.
I know it's. Let's say the goy is
the landlord.
Yeah, very good. It's going to end up that the tenant farmer will end up with a lot less.
Correct.
He has to give £10, but if he has to first take off 20%,
correct,
he's going to remain with less.
Correct.
But the coin and the Levi won't lose anything, as they should not, because ein kiyam la'akum. And now the Gemara we're going to begin part today, and God willing, part tomorrow. Says the Gemara, Masnisa Messiah L'Dei, or Masnisa Messiah L'Dei. We're going to have a brayso, each one supporting the other opinion. Again, everything today is like the whole Yerushalmi. There's opposite versions. We're going to learn with the gears of the Marafulda clearly. See in the middle of the Amid, and we're going to go today with the brayso. Masnisa Messiah L'Rabla. We're going to learn this girsa, which is the girsa of the Marafulda, and now we're quoting the Brayz. Which is exactly what we had in the Mishnah. However, now we're having something new. Meir says, "Ma'aser b'noisamay." Now, guys, who holds enki and la'akum? Gabaldi. No, it's now all of a sudden we are introducing. Yeah, but this is me Yisrael. I know. Now, which means that the Tanakama says, that's look inside the Marafulda, the third, second, last narrow line. These are the words of the Gemara, and it's trying to come to a conclusion. First wide line in the Marafulda. Under the Gemara, my Tamad Rabbanan that they say only Toidim is ein loimer k'maisha amru hachavraya, cannot be the way the Chavraya learned pshat in our Mishnah. Let's read inside the Gemara. Keep your finger in the Marafulda. Ho Rabbanan amrim konsu chachamim b'choicher min hagoy v'loy konsu chachamim b'choicher mi Yisrael. If the reason of the Tanakama would be the way the Chavraya learned. And what did the Chavraya learn, Chavra? That the reason why a Choicher Magoy has to be Ma'aseh, right? Choicher Mi Yisrael only told him because of the Knas, because we want for the land to be owned by whom? To be owned by Jews. If that would be the reason, so why would Rabbi Meir hold in the case of the Braisa that your Choicher Sadeh Mi Yisrael, why would you have to be Ma'aseh? It doesn't fit. The land is already belonging to a Yid. If the only reason why you would have to be Ma'aseh, it has to do not with because it looks like you're being Perei Achoyev from Tevel, but because we want for a Jew to own the land. We don't want for a Goy to own the land, because if a Goy is going to own the land, we don't want Goyim to own the land, whether it is because the Yesh King and La'akum. So then it's not Shaykh when a Jew owns the land. So how would you explain Abi Meir? Look inside the Marafuld again, the end of the first white line under the Gemara. Harabanan, who the Amri Hainu Achavraya, that's what he means over here. B'Shem Rabbi Yechon Karabanan. Haheim Amru Dolay Konsu B'Choicher Yisrael. It was if the reason behind the Choicher Ma'akom would be because of a Knas, then we would have no way of understanding this Rav Meir of the Braisa. So my Tamam Rav Meir Ma'asav Enoisoloi. Ela Korchach, that the reason why we have in our Mishnah by the Goy Ma'aseh is not because of a Knas. I'm reading inside the Marafulda. Ela mishum tafsa midas hadin. Evachi k'amar Rabbanan de Rav Meir. Tafsa midas hadin v'choicher mi Yisrael. Of course not. So that's why, since there is no midas hadin, because the owner is going to give up trumas umaisis, like we said, you're not depriving the Kohen and the Levi from anything. That will be the explanation of the Talmud. Famul Rav Meir in No, be'emes tafsu. So let's read it inside. So the yesh knas li Yisrael, elo hacheni. These are new words that Rabbanan Amri, the way we learned that tafsa midas hadin v'chaychem Yisrael. There is no midas hadin to obligate a yid, which is why the chachamim of the Braisa, as our Mishnah holds, that when you're chaychem Yisrael, you're only toidim v'noisamim. Now here I can give you an explanation to Rav Meir, and here we're going to turn to Daf Nun Daled. But based on the understanding of Rabbi Law, it's about not paying tevel, not paying a debt with tevel, not paying from someone else's produce. But Rav Meir Amar in that Tov Samidas Hadin v'choicher mi Yisrael. What does that mean? That that even when the owner is a Jew, so what? What grew in the land has to be tithed. I have to give the guy 10 pounds. So Rav Meir holds that since some of what I'm giving will end up in Biyad Kohen, Biyad Levi, there's Biyad Meiser Sheni, there is a part of it that's Trumas or Meisers that has to be separated. Even though the Yid, the owner, will do it, how can I pay? How can I pay my 10 pounds when these 10 pounds are not 10 pounds? I didn't give him 10 pounds. Why did I not give him 10 pounds? Because this is a product that has to be tithed. So Rav Meir can argue with that. He says, so what that you made us such a tithe? It's not yours to pay. You're paying with that which does not belong to you. If the reason would be knas, there would be no way of explaining Rav Meir. That's the way the Gemara is being approved. But it's not because of a knas. Not because we want to discourage going from owning land. The whole thing is about how am I allowed to give my percent? So by the way, by Mekabel, Rav Meir doesn't argue. By Mekabel. Because by Mekabel, we look at it as from the outset, the owner owns half and I own half. I'm leaving the owner what always belonged to him. By a choicher, Rav Meir understands that the type of agreement that a tenant farmer made with the owner, Rav Meir will hold, is that the owner says, I'm leasing you my land. I want you to pay me 10 pounds of potatoes if you're growing potatoes. How can I give him 10 pounds of potatoes if they're not tithed? It's very simple. It's tevel. You can't pay your debt with tevel. So, Gavaldik. So that will be a raya to Rabbi Ila's understanding of our Mishnah, which is not the way we learned it when we learned the Mishnah. And God willing, tomorrow we'll continue on Daf Nun Daled. We're going to have a brisa that will be a base, a messiah to the understanding of the Chavraya. And what we concluded today is something huge, because even though a few daf ago we kept on saying that everyone paskins like Rab Shimon, to the point the Gemara says, why did you even have to say it? We know Rab Meir and Rab Shimon. Remember that? Halachi kira Rab Shimon. Now we're actually saying that Rabbi Yochanan, according to one version, paskins like Rab Meir.